Today we're unboxing an iPhone X that's been sealed in its box for over 7 years. I found this on eBay for a really good price. It was only $250. So just 1/4 of its original price. Taking a closer look at the packaging here, you'll see a fair amount of wear across the plastic seal. And that's a very good sign that this seal is authentic. Here on the back of the box, we can see that this is a 64GB model in the space gray color. And I'm really excited to have that space gray color because around a month ago, I unboxed a sealed iPhone X in the silver color. I did run some checks on this iPhone with the serial number and the IMEI. From the serial number, I found out that this device was produced in July of 2018. And according to that production date, this device should be running iOS 11.4.1. Lastly, I made sure to check the IMEI number to find out that this iPhone has never been activated. Also, I'm fully aware that breaking this seal will destroy a lot of the value that this device holds. But I really prefer to open my devices up and enjoy them rather than to let them sit on a shelf. So let's go ahead and pull the tab on this seal now. And now we can lift this wrapping straight upward. And now we can remove the top from the box. We're first met here with a literature packet, so let's remove that. And now we can see our untouched iPhone X. It looks like some dust and debris has made its way in here, but I don't see any fingerprints on the display. Now let's lift the device up. And there we go, our space gray iPhone X is now free. Let's go ahead and remove this plastic film from the front and back panels. And there we go. Wow, this iPhone is looking flawless. Let's get it connected to a charger now. And there we go. After a very troubling period of time, I do get the charging screen here. It took this screen well over a minute to pop up, and I was definitely thinking the worst. So we'll get the iPhone set to the side and take a look at the included accessories. So this was from an era where Apple was very generous in what they included with your iPhone. We have this small 5-watt USB-A power adapter, as well as this set of wired earpods with a remote and mic. And this iPhone is from that weird transitionary period where Apple was still including the Lightning to 3.5mm headphone jack adapter. This was really still necessary as Apple had just removed the headphone jack from the iPhone 7 1 year prior. Lastly, here in the box, we get our Lightning to USB-A power cable. Getting this great selection of accessories is one of the best things about unboxing older iPhones. As of late 2020, Apple stopped including the headphones as well as the power adapter. And lastly here, we'll take a look at the literature packet. This included a quick start guide, which was especially important for the iPhone X as you were interacting with it in all new ways. You also had your regulatory info as well as 2 Apple stickers. And oddly enough, I believe the Apple stickers are something else that Apple no longer includes with their iPhones. Okay, well the iPhone X has now powered up. This white hello screen with the bold hello text was only used from iOS 11 through iOS 14. It was replaced with a blurred background and a cursive hello font in iOS 15. This information icon in the bottom right of the display does let us know that this is running no newer than iOS 12, however, as it slightly changed in appearance for iOS 13. So let's go through this setup process now. And okay, here's a pretty bad sign. This quick start screen in the setup is actually depicting the default wallpaper for iOS 12. So I'm not sure why that is. Hopefully it's just some sort of glitch and we actually do have iOS 11. And okay, it looks like we did get through the activation process. Okay, here we have a good sign. The Siri screen is actually depicting the iOS 11 wallpaper. And okay, here on the home screen, we do sadly see the iOS 12 wallpaper again. Let's go into settings and see which version we have. And okay, we do see iOS 12.0 here. So I'm definitely bummed that this is running iOS 12, as I was really hoping for this device's original version, iOS 11. Okay, well I have spent some time with this iPhone and I've done a little bit more thinking about the whole iOS 11, iOS 12 discrepancy. So first off, I decided to manually decode the serial number to get the production date for this device. Just because I wanted to fact check the website I used that was telling me this was made in July of 2018. So the The fourth and fifth characters in the serial number are the ones that reveal the production date. The fourth character for mine is the letter X, which represents the second half of 2018. And the fifth character is a 3, which represents the third week of that half. So it turns out the mid-July 2018 production date for this device was perfectly accurate. However, the 12.0 version that this device is running was not released until September. I did notice though that the actual purchase date for this device was not until December of 2018. Usually iPhones are given whatever version is the newest at the time of their production date, so I'm really not too sure what went on with this one. I know I'm probably going to get a lot of comments saying that this device was somehow opened up, updated, and then resealed. But I really don't think that's the case, and I'll explain why. So here with my sealed iPhone X I unboxed around a month ago, you can see I was able to put the plastic wrap back on the box. But even though it all kind of came back together with a factory look, this pull tab does not operate in the same way. As you can see, it just kind of loosely lifts straight upward. So as the pull tab for the seal on this device operated normally, I really do not believe that it was resealed. And also the appearance of this device was just really nice with no type of fingerprints or any imperfections. But anyway, if you have a thought on how this iPhone X is running iOS 12.0 from the factory, leave me a comment below. Like I said, I think this is still really cool to have in my collection, and I'm very grateful for it. One of the visual differences for iOS 12, besides this new default wallpaper here, was that the FaceTime icon was now included in the top left of the home screen by default. And another small touch is that the iBooks application was now just simply called Books. But the iPhone X had some pretty exciting default wallpapers that were exclusive to this model. And those would be the live wallpapers. So these first two options were featured on the box for the devices, as you can see. And when using the 3D touch feature by applying force to the display, these images animate. So it's really cool to take a look at all of the moving colors. This second option here was for the silver model. And there was a third choice here that was not used on the box for any device, as it only came in those two colors. But it is speculated that this wallpaper was meant to be used on a gold iPhone X that would not end up being released. We also have three options here on this second row. These were added in iOS 11.2. These kind of resemble watercolor with some metallic flecks. And some of these were actually used in commercials for the iPhone X. Here's a look at that second option. And here is the third. We did get a refresh to the dynamic category of wallpapers for the iPhone X. On the older models, these wallpapers had colored backgrounds, but for the iPhone X, they all had a black background. And the black background on these was really cool for showing off the black levels of the OLED display. And lastly here for the still images, these were actually all carried over from iOS 11 with the exception of the default here for iOS 12. Also, while we're here in settings, let's take a look at the battery health of this device. And we do see 100% as our maximum capacity. I'm definitely going to set the live wallpaper that was meant for this space gray model. So now let's talk about what the iPhone X was. So this was, of course, the 10th anniversary iPhone announced alongside the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus in September of 2017. The 10 here began shipping to customers a couple months later in November. And this model goes down in history as being the biggest change to iPhone since the original model. The iPhone 8 and 8 Plus released alongside this kept a very traditional iPhone design, with the rectangular display, larger bezels, and the home button that featured Touch ID, which in its basic form was still pretty much identical to the very first iPhone. But the iPhone X was just such a huge departure. It featured a rounded display with no home button and the new Face ID authentication feature. So rather than navigating the UI with a home button, you now navigated with a gesture-based interface. And the display on this model really was the star of the show. It was a 5.8-inch OLED panel with a resolution of 2435 by 1125. So it was Apple's very first iPhone to feature the OLED display technology, as every previous model had used an LCD display. It had tons of benefits like really vivid colors, true black levels, and a super high pixel density. So there were 458 pixels per inch here, while the previous LCD iPhones were in the lower 300s. This model did introduce the somewhat infamous notch in the display, and this was necessary to house all of the Face ID components. But it meant that the status bar on the iPhone X looked pretty different, so you would no longer actively see your carrier and battery percentage. You would have to swipe down the control center from the top right to access those. And the iPhone X here had a really nice stainless steel band. It was the first time Apple used stainless steel on an iPhone since the 4S in 2011. But the stainless steel here had a very mirrored finish. And here on the back we found a glass panel that now enabled wireless charging. We also got a new dual camera setup that was vertically arranged. The wide and the telephoto camera were 12 megapixel sensors, and they both now included optical image stabilization. And the front-facing camera now featured a portrait mode. Battery life wasn't a huge strong suit for this model. It was quoted to be around 2 hours longer than the iPhone 7, but it notably did not have as good a battery life as the iPhone 8 models. And speaking of charging, there was an accessory announced alongside this iPhone that would never end up being released. And that was called AirPower. It was a charging mat for your iPhone, your AirPods, and your Apple Watch. This iPhone was powered by the A11 Bionic chip. And that was pretty significant because it was Apple's first 6-core processor for an iPhone. And this model had 3 gigabytes of RAM. The X only received a moderate amount of software support from Apple though. The last major release it supports was iOS 16 in 2022. But another aspect of the iPhone X that you cannot ignore was its price tag. So this was the first $1,000 iPhone at a price of $999. That got you a 64 gigabyte model, but you could also step up to the 256 gigabyte model for over $1,000. And that price tag was pretty polarizing at the time. It would later become accepted though, especially as this model would eventually morph into the Pro model iPhones. And for the section of this video talking about this device's original software, I'm going to bring in my silver iPhone X that is actually running iOS 11. So aside from bringing the new user experience for the iPhone X, this version did have some more differences from its previous version, iOS 10. One of which being quite a few new icons. Bringing in a device here running iOS 10, you can see some of those differences. So the Maps icon was new, so was the Reminders as well as the iTunes Store and App Store. Also, the icons in your dock no longer had labels, and there's now an all-new control center. iOS 10 here had a pretty strange control center with 3 pages. But this full screen control center was much more suited for the iPhone X design. You could use 3D Touch on this to kind of expand these little platters. And this design is still pretty similar to the control center we have today. This version also went back to signal bars instead of dots that were used from iOS 7 through 10. And there was a slight difference to the appearance of the battery indicator. It was now much thicker in iOS 11. Multitasking with the iPhone X on iOS 11 was pretty quirky. You would actually have to hold down on the applications until these red minus buttons appeared to then swipe them upward. As if you would try to just swipe them up without doing so, it would just take you back to the home screen. And conveniently, I can show you with the iPhone X running iOS 12 that extra step was removed. And apparently there was an exclusive ringtone for the iPhone X running iOS 11. So that would be the reflection ringtone. This would later come to all devices, but for some reason it was exclusive to the iPhone X with iOS 11. So here's what that sounds like. The lock screen here on iOS 11 was now merged with the notification center, and there was a new Files application. Siri now had a new voice on this version, and you would access it using the side button here on the device, as there was no longer that home button to hold for use of Siri. So we'll take a quick listen at that voice. What version of iOS do I have?
You're running iOS version 11.4.
Also with the iOS 11 Siri, Apple really focused on its translation abilities. You could now scan QR codes with the camera application. And this was the first version to feature automatic setup. And that's the feature where you keep your new iPhone next to your old one during the setup process and it wirelessly restores it. iOS 11 was actually a bigger update for the iPad though rather than the iPhone, giving it a slightly more Mac OS inspired experience. So that pretty much concludes my look at this iPhone X that's been sealed in its box for over 7 years. This definitely is one of the most revolutionary iPhones to ever be produced, second only to the original. It's pretty cool how this iPhone X is basically still the same experience that you get with Apple's newest iPhone 16. But when it was released, Apple said that this design would carry them for the next 10 years. So it'll be really cool to see what they have in store for the iPhone 20 in 2027. Taking a look at this one here was definitely a roller coaster of emotions with the unexpected iOS 12. But leave me a comment with your thoughts below and be sure to get subscribed for more sealed iOS device content. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys in the next one.